Hi, and welcome back. Today, we'll dive into ways to use drive and distortion within a modular system using the Erica Synths Dual Drive. We'll start off with a quick overview of the features of the module, and then we'll dive into a series of patches to create interesting mono and stereo sounds. There are a lot of fun things to cover, so let's dive right in. This is the Erica Synths Dual Drive. It features two identical overdrive circuits on the left and right side of the module. Each section has a mono input and output, and the gain and drive knob to control the amount of overdrive. Both knobs are part of the same circuit, and you need to open both of them a bit for the circuit to start having effect. On most uses, the gain is more clean and the drive the more distorted control. Each section has a mode switch to select one of three flavors of overdrive. The first and last are more round and worn drives, and the middle one offers a distinctly different, more dry and crunchy overdrive. Each section also has two CV inputs, so you can control both the gain and drive with control voltages. The attenuator here controls the amount for both inputs simultaneously. Finally, the output of the first circuit is internally connected to the input of the second. So you can easily use the two circuits in series if you like. If you patch up the input of the second unit, that internal connection is broken. It's a fairly straightforward module, but it can have a huge impact on your sound. And it has a few features that are crucial to me. Because it was designed for high quality audio in a modular system, there is no loss of bass frequencies if you turn up the gain or drive. That makes it suitable to process things like an entire drum bus, kick drum or bass line. With the knob set to 0, there is no overdrive or distortion. So it's easy to use your clean signal even with the dual drive permanently in your patch. This way you can gradually bring in crunch and distortion, for example when you're performing. And it's not a drive on or off choice. There's also a built-in limiter, so you don't have to worry about clipping other modules or the input of your outboard mixer. Finally, because there's two identical circuits, it works great to process stereo signals. And because the CV inputs give you a lot of ways to add movement to your sound, you can create signals with a dynamic stereo field. Let's start with some basic mono patches. For example, you can use a single sample player with a bunch of single drum hits and use a simple sequencer to sequence those hits. Then you can use a smooth random voltage, somewhat related to the tempo of the drums, to modulate the drive input. This way you give the simple drum pattern some random dynamics over time and make it less static. You can also take a steady kick drum and hi-hat and feed each of the sounds to one side of the dual drive. Then use two sequences from the Korg SQ1 with different step lengths to modulate the drive or gain, to create subtle motion in the kick and a bit more drastic motion in the heads. The dual drive also works great on synth lines, especially more dynamic ones. Here are two simple synth voices creating 8-step melodies. Each voice is sent to one side of the dual drive. Then you can send two LFOs with inverse polarities, for example two sine waves from the black octa source, to create tension between the two. When one overdrives, the other becomes more gentle, and the other way around. You can use both CV inputs on the dual drive to create more complex dynamics. For example, let's use a clock to drive a clock divider and use a division to trigger a simple steady synth sample. The sample is sent to the dual drive with both the gain and drive set pretty low. Then you can use a faster clock division to trigger a short envelope and feed that to the drive CV. And in addition, you can use a slower division to trigger a longer envelope and send that to the gain input. However, because there's only one attenuator, you have to decide which signal you want to have the most effect. In our case, that's the fast envelope to the gain. And then use an attenuator to control the signal with a more subtle influence. If you're into more grungy techno, the drive is also a great way to sculpt your kick. For example, if you take a kick drum and a sample player playing a gritty noise sample, you can send both those sounds to independent VCAs. When you use a steady clock to trigger both samples, you can multiply that clock signal and send it to two envelopes. One inverted, with the attack shaping the length of the initial kick, and the decay set to bring the end of a longer kick back up. The second envelope is used on the VCA of the gritty sample with a longer rising envelope to increase the volume of the grit after the kick hits. Then, when you mix those signals and send it to the dual drive, it can really glue those sounds together to make a massive sound. Because the dual drive has two identical circuits, it's suitable to process true stereo signals. For example, you can feed a stereo synth or drum machine directly into the dual drive. But of course, it also works on stereo modular patches. For example, in this patch, an oscillator and filter are creating a constant low drone. Then, the signal is sent through granular processor clouds to create a nice stereo texture. The effect is modulated with a bit of random voltage, and then the left and right output of clouds are sent through the two sides of the dual drive to overdrive the stereo sound. But because both circuits also have CV inputs, you can use the module to take a mono signal and turn it into an interesting dynamic stereo signal. Making stereo patches works great on drums and synth voices. Here, a simple voice is made with a single oscillator, delay and filter. That signal is multiplied to the two independent sides of the dual drive to create a stereo signal. A slow random voltage is sent to the delay to create a synth line with a lot of harmonics. And the short attack decay envelope is used on the filter for a pulsating effect. A sequencer is used to create a simple melody and trigger the envelope. Finally, a regular and inverted sine wave are used to modulate each of the drive CV inputs. And to make it more dynamic, another slow sine wave LFO is used to modulate the frequency of the LFO creating the stereo signal. You can experiment with the same patch, but with audio rate modulation. For example, instead of the two inverted sine waves, use another tuned oscillator. But again, make sure to multiply and invert one of the signals before modulating the dual drive. Working with audio rate modulation creates a more steady, fat stereo sound. I really like this way of creating stereo sounds, so here's another example with a single oscillator through a resonant high and low pass filter. This time with some slow modulation to the low pass filter and two square waves modulating both the drive CV inputs. Again with a bit of modulation to the square wave LFO to have the tempo drift over time. Of course, it also works great on drums. For example, you can take a steady hi-hat pattern, but multiply the signal, feed those to two sides of the dual drive, and use those as your left and right output. Then take a smooth random voltage, send it to one of the CV inputs, and send a copy through an inverter and to the CV input of the second unit. Or you can use the sample player to create a drum pattern again. The first sequence of the Korg SQ1 is used to trigger the drums and select samples. The second sequence is used to the drive CV input. And again, a copy of that signal is sent through an inverter to the second drive CV input. Now, by adjusting the attenuators on the dual drive, you can create interesting stereo overdrive. Here, an 8-step sequence is used to sequence the drums, and a 7-step sequence to create a stereo field on the dual drive. If you'd like to support this video series, or you want to get access to the PDF sheets of the illustrations I use in this and many of my other videos, have a look at my Patreon. And if you'd like to learn more about voltage controlled LFOs or the black octasource, you can have a look at either of these videos. Also smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now, thanks for watching and see you next time.